Captain Sarah Chun approached the main entrance of Naval Special Warfare Command, her forearm crutch clicking against the concrete with each measured step. The morning sun glinted off her crisp business attire as she navigated the slight incline leading to the security checkpoint. Her briefcase hung securely across her shoulder, containing the technical specifications that had brought her to this classified facility. 3 men in Navy utilities lounged near the entrance, their conversation halting as they noticed her approach. Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez nudged his companions, Martinez and Thompson, drawing their attention to the woman making her way toward them. Rodriguez's eyebrows lifted with apparent surprise as he observed her walking aid. "Look what we have here," Rodriguez murmured to his teammates, his voice carrying just enough to be audible. "Another contractor who can't even make it up the walkway without help." Martinez chuckled softly, shaking his head as he watched Chen's steady progress. Command's really scraping the bottom of the barrel these days. What's next? Consultants in wheelchairs telling us how to run operations. Thompson crossed his arms, his expression shifting to one of barely concealed amusement. "Maybe she's here to teach us about workplace accommodations. God knows the Navy's going soft." Chun reached the security station, presenting her credentials to the guard with professional efficiency. The Marine behind the bulletproof glass examined her identification thoroughly, his demeanor respectful but clearly surprised by her mobility aid. He glanced between her face and the photograph on her military contractor badge twice before processing her entry. "Captain Chun for the 1000 hours briefing," she stated clearly, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to military protocols. The guard's surprise deepened as he noted her captain's rank designation. "Yes, ma'am. You'll need to proceed to Building 7, Conference Room, Charlie. Do you need assistance navigating the facility?" "That won't be necessary. Thank you." Chun accepted her credentials back, slipping them into her jacket pocket with practiced ease. Behind her, Rodriguez's voice rose slightly, intended for her ears. "Great. Another pencil pusher who can't even walk straight, trying to tell operators how to do their jobs. This ought to be entertaining." Martinez added his own commentary, his tone dripping with condescension. "Wonder what brilliant insight someone who needs help standing up can offer about combat operations." Chen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she maintained her forward progress without acknowledging the comments. The administrative staff member who approached to escort her seemed professional enough, though she noticed the woman's eyes lingering on her crutch with obvious curiosity. "Captain Chun, I'm Petty Officer Williams. I'll show you to the briefing room." Williams gestured toward the main corridor, her manner respectful despite her apparent uncertainty about Chen's presence. As they moved through the facility, the 3 SEALs fell in a step behind them, their conversation continuing at a volume clearly meant to be overheard. Thompson's voice carried the particular edge that military personnel used when they wanted to make a point without direct confrontation. "You know what I don't understand? How someone who can barely handle a morning walk thinks they can advise people whose lives depend on physical capability." Rodriguez agreed enthusiastically, his words echoing off the corridor walls. "It's like having a blind person teach marksmanship. Sure, they might know the theory, but when has theory ever stopped a bullet?" Chen's grip on her crutch handle tightened, her knuckles whitening slightly, but her pace never faltered. Williams glanced back nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the situation developing behind them. "The briefing room is just ahead, ma'am," Williams said, her voice slightly louder than necessary, apparently hoping to drown out the continued commentary. Martinez seized the opportunity to deliver what he clearly considered the final word on the subject. "Well, at least when things go sideways, we won't have to worry about dead weight slowing us down. Hard to be a liability when you're stuck behind a desk where you belong." The group reached Conference Room Charlie, and Williams opened the door with visible relief. Chen stepped inside, her professional composure intact despite the gauntlet she had just navigated. The 3 SEALs continued past, their laughter fading as they moved down the corridor, already anticipating what they clearly expected to be an entertaining waste of their morning. Chun entered conference room Charlie to find the three SEALs already seated around the polished table, their relaxed postures suggesting they viewed the upcoming briefing as little more than entertainment. Lieutenant Commander Brooks stood at the head of the room, reviewing documents spread across the surface. He looked up as Chun approached, his expression professionally neutral. "Gentlemen, this is Captain Chun, our tactical systems analyst for the drone modification project," Brooks announced, gesturing toward the empty chair positioned near the projection screen. "Captain, please proceed when ready." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed as he studied Chun with obvious skepticism. "Sir, with respect, I have to ask why someone who needs assistance walking is advising us on combat operations. Seems like a disconnect between theory and reality." Brooks frowned slightly at the comment, but said nothing as Chun moved to the front of the room, setting her briefcase on the table with deliberate precision. She opened it and withdrew a tablet computer, her movements efficient despite the watchful stares of the three SEALs. "The modifications I'm presenting today involve advanced surveillance integration for close air support missions," Chun began, activating the wall display with practiced ease. Technical diagrams filled the screen, showing detailed schematics of drone sensor packages. These systems have already proven effective in reducing operator exposure during reconnaissance phases. Martinez exchanged a meaningful look with Thompson before speaking up. "Ma'am, no offense, but how exactly does someone who's never been in the field understand what operators actually need? This looks like more desk jockey theorizing to me." Chen's finger moved across the tablet, bringing up operational data that made all three SEALs sit forward slightly. "The modifications I developed were field-tested during 17 separate missions in Syria. Casualty reduction rates improved by 43% when teams used the enhanced targeting protocols." Thompson's eyebrows rose with surprise, but his skeptical expression remained unchanged. "Syria? What kind of missions are we talking about here? Because I'm having trouble picturing you humping gear through hostile territory." "The specifics remain classified, but I can tell you the systems saved lives during multiple extraction operations," Chin replied, advancing to the next slide. "The enhanced thermal imaging alone prevented 3 separate ambush situations that traditional surveillance would have missed." Rodriguez whispered something to Martinez that Chin couldn't quite catch, but their shared laughter was clearly audible. Martinez nodded before addressing Chin directly. "Captain, with all due respect, real operators don't need fancy gadgets to do their jobs. We need systems designed by people who understand what it's like when someone's shooting at you. Have you ever had rounds coming your way?" Chun paused her presentation, her gaze moving steadily across the three faces before settling on Martinez. "The question you should be asking is whether you want these improvements implemented or if you prefer maintaining current casualty rates. The technology works. The data supports it. Your personal opinions about my qualifications don't change those facts." Thompson leaned forward, his interest apparently piqued despite his continued skepticism. "Okay, let's say you're right about the numbers. Walk us through a real scenario. Show us how someone who's never been under fire understands combat conditions well enough to design systems for people who have." Chen's fingers moved across the tablet again, bringing up a detailed tactical map. "Northern Syria, approximately 18 months ago. Foreman reconnaissance team pinned down by enemy fire in an urban environment. Traditional drone surveillance showed clear streets, but enhanced thermal imaging revealed 7 hostiles positioned in buildings with overlapping fields of fire." The room grew noticeably quieter as Chun continued, her voice taking on the precise cadence of someone recounting actual events rather than theoretical scenarios. "Standard protocol would have been immediate extraction under covering fire, likely resulting in casualties during egress. The enhanced system identified a thermal signature pattern indicating the hostiles were using a coordinated ambush formation. This intelligence allowed the team to execute a flanking maneuver that neutralized the threat without friendly casualties." Rodriguez's casual posture had shifted to something more attentive, though his expression remained doubtful. "That's a pretty detailed scenario for someone who wasn't there." How exactly do you know what the team was thinking or what their options were? Chen met his gaze directly, her composure unwavering despite the obvious challenge in his question. Because the after-action reports were thorough, and the team leaders provided detailed feedback on system performance during operational debriefs. Martinez shook his head slowly, his smile carrying more than a hint of condescension. Reports are one thing, Captain. Actually being there when the bullets start flying is something else entirely. You can read all the debriefs you want, but that doesn't give you the real picture of what happens when everything goes sideways. Brooks cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the questioning had taken. Perhaps we should focus on the technical specifications rather than operational history. Captain Shun, can you walk us through the integration requirements? Shin nodded, advancing to the next set of diagrams, but Rodriguez wasn't finished with his line of inquiry. Sir, I think it's relevant to understand the source of these recommendations. If Captain Shun has actual field experience, that's one thing. But if we're implementing systems based on second-hand reports from someone who's never left the wire, that's a different conversation entirely. The challenge hung in the air as Chun prepared to respond, her professional mask showing the first hairline cracks under the sustained pressure. Rodriguez pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the floor as he fixed Chun with an unwavering stare. Captain, let's cut through the diplomatic language here. Your disability makes you fundamentally unfit to advise combat personnel. How can someone who can't handle basic mobility requirements understand what operators need in life-or-death situations? Thompson nodded emphatically, his voice carrying the weight of apparent conviction. Exactly. Real operators don't get the luxury of moving at half speed or taking breaks when their bodies can't keep up. We need advice from people who've actually lived these realities, not observe them from a distance. Chen's grip on her tablet tightened, but her voice remained level as she responded. Gentlemen, would you prefer I continue explaining how these modifications can reduce your casualty rates, or would you rather maintain current loss statistics because you disagree with my physical condition? Martinez leaned forward, his expression shifting to one of barely contained challenge. Here's what I prefer, Captain. I prefer proof that you understand field conditions well enough to make recommendations that could get us killed if they're wrong. Talk is cheap. Show us you've been where we've been. Chin set her tablet down deliberately, her movements controlled despite the obvious tension building in the room. I've observed more tactical scenarios than most operators see in their entire careers. The Syrian operations I mentioned involve complex, multi-phase extractions under sustained enemy fire. The teams faced encirclement, ammunition shortages, and communication breakdowns. Rodriguez interrupted with a harsh laugh. Observed. That's the key word right there. You observed. You weren't there sweating through your gear while rounds snapped overhead. You weren't making split-second decisions with your teammates' lives hanging in the balance. The reports I reviewed included detailed accounts of exactly those situations, Chen replied, her professional composure showing signs of strain. Multiple teams provided first-hand testimony about system performance under extreme conditions. Thompson shook his head dismissively, his tone growing more aggressive. Reports don't tell you what it feels like when your heart's pounding so hard you can barely hear the radio. They don't capture the weight of knowing that one wrong call sends your buddy home in a box. You can't understand that from a desk. Martinez stood abruptly, moving to the front of the room where he could face Chun directly. Prove it. Right now. Tell us about a specific moment when you had to make a life-or-death decision under fire. Not something you read about. Something you lived. Chen's jaw tightened as she met his challenging stare. The operations I'm referring to remain classified at levels that require congressional notification. I cannot provide the details you're requesting. Rodriguez erupted with derisive laughter, slapping the table as he turned to his teammates. There it is. The magic classified excuse. Every desk warrior's favorite way to avoid admitting they've never heard a shot fired in anger. It's always classified when someone gets called out, Thompson agreed, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. How convenient that all the evidence proving your field experience happens to be locked away where nobody can verify it. Brooks shifted uncomfortably in his position at the head of the table, clearly torn between maintaining order and allowing his team to voice their concerns. His intervention came hesitantly. Perhaps we should return to the technical discussion. The modifications Captain Chun is proposing have documented effectiveness rates. Martinez ignored the lieutenant commander's attempt at redirection, pressing his advantage. No, sir, this is exactly the technical discussion we need to have. We're talking about implementing systems designed by someone who's never faced the conditions they're supposed to improve. That's not just inefficient, it's dangerous. Chen's composure cracked slightly as she responded, her voice carrying an edge that hadn't been present before. You have absolutely no idea what conditions I've faced or what decisions I've made. Your assumptions about my experience are as uninformed as your attitudes about disability. Rodriguez seized on her emotional response immediately. Now we're getting somewhere. If you've got real experience, prove it. Give us something concrete instead of hiding behind classification levels and technical specifications. The specifics of my deployments involve operations that remain active, Chen replied, her professional mask slipping further. Personnel involved in those missions maintain operational security protocols that supersede your curiosity about my qualifications. Thompson moved closer, his body language becoming increasingly confrontational. Operational security is one thing, Captain, but you can't expect us to trust recommendations from someone who won't even confirm they've been in combat. That's not how this works. Martinez nodded agreement, his voice taking on a tone of false reasonableness. We're not asking for classified details, just confirmation that you've actually experienced the conditions you're designing systems for. That seems like a pretty basic requirement. Chen looked between the three faces surrounding her, each displaying varying degrees of skepticism and challenge. Her tablet screen had gone dark, the technical diagrams that represented months of development work now forgotten in the face of their sustained interrogation. Brooks finally found his voice, though his intervention lacked conviction. Gentlemen, Captain Chen's qualifications were verified before this assignment. Perhaps we should focus on evaluating the systems themselves rather than questioning her background. Rodriguez turned toward Brooks, his expression suggesting the lieutenant commander's authority carried little weight in this situation. Sir, with respect, evaluating systems and evaluating their designers aren't separate issues. If someone's never been shot at, how can they understand what shooters need? The room fell silent except for the barely audible hum of the air conditioning system. Chun stood motionless at the front of the room, her professional facade finally showing genuine cracks under the sustained pressure of their collective doubt. Brooks gestured toward the corridor, his voice cutting through the tension that had settled over the briefing room. Captain Chun, could I have a word with you privately? Chen nodded, gathering her materials with movements that betrayed her frayed composure. As they stepped into the hallway, Rodriguez's voice carried clearly through the partially open door behind them. Give her the classified excuse playbook while you're at it, sir. She's going to need all the help she can get. Brooks closed the door firmly before turning to face Chun, his expression serious but not unsympathetic. Captain, I need to ask you directly. What's your actual military background? The resistance you're encountering suggests there's more to your story than a typical contractor assignment. Chen leaned against the wall, her professional mask dropping slightly as exhaustion showed through. Lieutenant Commander, my service record involves operations that require special access programs to review. I understand there's skepticism, but I cannot provide details that would compromise ongoing security protocols. Brooks studied her face carefully, noting the precise military terminology and the way she held herself despite the obvious stress. Your tactical knowledge during the briefing exceeded what I'd expect from a typical systems analyst. You spoke about those Syrian operations with the kind of detail that suggests first-hand familiarity. The after-action reports were extremely thorough, Chen replied, though her tone suggested she was choosing her words with unusual care. Brooks nodded slowly, his instincts as an officer telling him there were significant gaps in the information he'd been provided. I'm going to make some calls. If there's more to your background than what's in the standard files, I need to know about it before this situation escalates further. They parted ways, Brooks heading toward his office while Chun returned to gather her remaining materials. As she re-entered the briefing room, Thompson was in the middle of an animated conversation with his teammates. $20 says she's never been within 100 miles of actual combat, Thompson declared, his voice loud enough to ensure Chun heard every word. Martinez laughed appreciatively. I'll take that bet, but only because I think it's more like 1,000 miles. Did you see how she dodged every specific question? Classic contractor move. Brooks closed his office door and immediately reached for his secure phone, dialing the personnel office extension. The conversation that followed was brief but illuminating. I need to review Captain Sarah Chen's complete service record, Brooks stated when the duty officer answered. Sir, I can provide basic assignment history, but her complete file requires special access verification. Most of her record is compartmentalized under special programs authorities. Brooks paused, his suspicions deepening. Standard contractor positions rarely required such extensive security protocols. What level of clearance would I need to access the complete file? You need approval from a 3-star general or higher, sir. The file contains special access program information that's restricted to need-to-know basis only. After ending the call, Brooks stared at his computer screen, trying to piece together the limited information available. Chen's security clearance showed TS/SCI with multiple special access program annotations, far exceeding the requirements for typical technical consulting work. Down the hallway, Chun had completed packing her materials while enduring continued commentary from the 3 SEALs. Rodriguez had taken point on what appeared to be a coordinated effort to undermine her credibility. You know what really bothers me about this whole situation? Rodriguez asked, his tone suggesting he was building toward a particular point. Command brings in someone who clearly can't handle the physical demands of military life, then expects us to take technical advice that could affect life-or-death situations. Thompson picked up the thread seamlessly. It's like asking a civilian to design body armor. Sure, they might understand the theory, but they've never felt what it's like to move under fire while wearing it. Chun shouldered her briefcase, her patience finally showing signs of complete exhaustion. Gentlemen, your concerns have been noted. I'll be presenting my final recommendations to Lieutenant Commander Brooks regardless of your personal opinions about my qualifications. Martinez stood as she moved toward the door, his posture deliberately blocking her direct path. Captain, no disrespect intended, but how do you expect operators to trust systems designed by someone who's never operated? That's not personal opinion, that's professional necessity. Brooks, meanwhile, had moved on to calling his contact at Special Operations Command, hoping to gather more information through informal channels. The conversation proved even more intriguing than his first attempt. Sarah Chun, the SOCOM representative, repeated, Sir, I can confirm she has files with us, but accessing her information requires need-to-know verification through special channels. What's the nature of your inquiry? She's consulting on technical modifications for my team, but there are questions about her operational background, Brooks explained. I can't discuss specifics, but I can tell you that anyone questioning Captain Chen's operational qualifications is operating with incomplete information. The line went dead, leaving Brooks staring at his phone with growing certainty that he was dealing with a situation far more complex than a routine contractor harassment incident. Back in the briefing room, Chen had finally reached the door, but Rodriguez wasn't finished with his interrogation. Just one more question, Captain. If you really have the field experience you're claiming, why won't you give us even one specific example? Something that doesn't compromise your precious classifications. Chun turned back, her composure hanging by the thinnest of threads. Because, Petty Officer Rodriguez, unlike some people in this room, I understand the difference between operational security and personal validation. She left without waiting for a response, her crutch clicking against the floor as she moved down the corridor. Behind her, the 3 SEALs exchanged looks of satisfaction, clearly convinced they had exposed what they believed to be an elaborate fraud. Staff Sergeant Williams observed the scene unfolding in the main corridor from her position at the administrative desk. Rodriguez had positioned himself directly in Chen's path, forcing the captain to navigate around him while he maintained an expression of feigned innocence. "Excuse me," Chen said quietly, adjusting her route to avoid the deliberate obstruction. Rodriguez stepped sideways, maintaining his blocking position while addressing his teammates loudly enough for the entire corridor to hear. Amazing how some people think they can advise operators on mobility when they can't even handle basic walking without assistance. Williams frowned as she watched the interaction, noting how Martinez and Thompson flanked Chen's alternate route, creating a gauntlet she had to navigate. Other personnel in the area had begun to notice the pattern, their conversations growing quieter as they observed the harassment. 20 minutes later, Williams knocked on Master Chief Peterson's office door, her expression serious as she entered. Peterson looked up from his paperwork with mild irritation at the interruption. "Master Chief, I need to report an incident involving the SEAL team and Captain Chun," Williams began, outlining what she had witnessed in the corridor. Peterson waved dismissively, his attention already returning to his documents. "Williams, those boys are just blowing off steam. They don't like outsiders telling them how to do their jobs. It's nothing they can't handle like professionals. Sir, this appears to be systematic harassment based on her disability. Multiple personnel have observed the pattern developing over several incidents." Peterson's expression shifted to one of mild annoyance. "Look, if Captain Chun has a problem with how my sailors are treating her, she can file a formal complaint. Until then, I'm not going to micromanage every interaction between contractors and my team." Williams left the office frustrated, knowing she had witnessed behavior that violated both military standards and basic human decency. As she returned to her desk, she noticed Chen setting up her laptop in the corridor conference area, apparently preparing for additional presentations. Rodriguez appeared moments later, his voice carrying clearly across the space. "Look who's back for round 2. I thought after this morning's reality check, our consultant might have realized this isn't the right environment for someone with her limitations." Chun continued her setup without responding, but Williams could see the tension in her shoulders as she worked. Thompson joined Rodriguez, positioning himself where Chun would have to look at him while she presented. "You know what I keep wondering?" Thompson announced to no one in particular. "How does someone who needs help walking think they can advise people whose lives depend on physical capability? It's like having a blind person teach marksmanship." Martinez completed the triangle, settling into a chair directly facing Chen's presentation area. Maybe she thinks having a disability gives her special insight into combat limitations. Problem is, we don't get to choose our limitations in the field. Brooks, meanwhile, had moved to his second round of phone calls, this time reaching out to a colleague at the Pentagon who specialized in special operations personnel management. "I need guidance on accessing service records for special access programs," Brooks explained. "The individual in question has clearances that exceed normal contractor requirements, and there are questions about operational background." His contact's response was measured but informative. If someone has SAP annotations on their clearance, there's usually a reason that goes beyond technical consulting. "What kind of resistance are you encountering?" Personnel are questioning combat experience based on physical appearance and disability status. The Pentagon contact paused significantly before responding. "That suggests incomplete information on your end. SAP clearances aren't handed out for desk jobs. I'd recommend pursuing this through official channels before the situation develops further." Back in the corridor, Chun had begun presenting technical data to a small group of officers who had gathered for the informal briefing. Her professional demeanor remained intact despite the continued commentary from the 3 SEALs. The enhanced targeting protocols reduce engagement time by an average of 37%, Chen explained, highlighting specific data points on her display. This translates directly to reduced exposure time for ground personnel. Rodriguez interrupted loudly from his position. "Captain, how do you know reduced exposure time actually helps if you've never been exposed yourself? Theoretical improvements don't always translate to real-world effectiveness." Commander Jackson, one of the attending officers, shifted uncomfortably as he witnessed the interruption. Williams noticed his expression growing increasingly disapproving as the pattern of harassment continued. Chen responded without looking toward Rodriguez. The data comes from actual mission reports spanning 18 months of implementation. Teams reported measurable improvements in both efficiency and safety metrics. Thompson leaned forward in his chair, his voice carrying an edge of mockery. Reports again. Always reports with you. Have you ever actually spoken to someone who used these systems under fire, or is all your feedback filtered through paperwork? Martinez added his voice to the chorus. It's a fair question, Captain. There's a big difference between reading about something and living it. Most of us here have lived it. Commander Jackson stood abruptly, his patience apparently exhausted. Petty officers, you're out of line. Captain Chun is here on official business, and your behavior is unprofessional. Rodriguez looked genuinely surprised by the rebuke. Sir, we're just asking legitimate questions about operational credibility. If someone's designing systems for combat use, shouldn't they understand combat conditions? Your questions stopped being legitimate when they became personal attacks, Jackson replied firmly. Continue this behavior, and you'll find yourselves explaining it to higher authority. Williams watched Jackson's intervention with satisfaction, but noticed that the three SEALs exchanged looks suggesting they viewed the commander's support as misguided rather than authoritative. As the informal briefing concluded, Chun packed her materials while the attending officers dispersed. Thompson made one final comment as she prepared to leave. Captain, we're not trying to be difficult. We just believe that people giving life-or-death advice should have life-or-death experience. That seems reasonable. Chen finally looked directly at him, her composure showing hairline fractures. Petty Officer Thompson, your definition of reasonable appears to include assumptions about my experience based solely on my physical appearance. That suggests the problem lies with your judgment, not my qualifications. She left without waiting for a response, but Williams noticed that her departure lacked the confident stride she had displayed earlier in the day. The pattern of harassment was clearly taking its toll, despite her professional attempts to maintain composure. Rodriguez watched her go, then turned to his teammates with satisfaction. Given another day or two, she'll request reassignment rather than keep dealing with operators who ask real questions about her qualifications. Rodriguez positioned himself strategically at the entrance to the main corridor, timing his movement to coincide with Chen's approach from the parking area. As she navigated the narrow doorway, he stepped forward, forcing her to halt abruptly and shift her weight awkwardly to avoid collision. Sorry about that, Captain, Rodriguez said with exaggerated politeness, making no effort to move aside. Didn't see you there. Sometimes it's hard to notice people moving at half speed. Chun adjusted her grip on her crutch, maneuvering around his deliberate obstruction while maintaining her professional composure. No problem, Petty Officer. I understand spatial awareness can be challenging for some people. Martinez appeared from the adjacent hallway as Chun cleared Rodriguez's position, his voice carrying the particular volume military personnel used when they wanted to ensure maximum audience exposure. You know what really bothers me about this whole situation? Martinez announced to Thompson, who had materialized near the water fountain. Broken soldiers taking up space that could be used by people who can actually contribute to mission success. Chen's stride faltered slightly at the broken soldier's comment, but she continued toward the conference room where her afternoon presentation was scheduled. Behind her, Thompson picked up the conversation thread with obvious enthusiasm. It's worse than that. It's not just taking up space, it's actively dangerous. What happens when someone who can't handle basic mobility requirements gives advice that gets real operators killed? Brooks had spent the morning making increasingly urgent phone calls, his latest attempt connecting him with a senior contact at the Pentagon's Special Operations Personnel Management Office. The conversation proved more revealing than his previous efforts. I can't discuss specifics, but I can tell you that questioning Captain Chen's operational qualifications suggests a serious information gap on your end, his contact explained carefully. Her name appears in connection with some of our most sensitive success stories. What level of authority would I need to access her complete record? Brooks asked. Admiral-level minimum. Possibly higher, depending on which program she was involved with. This isn't typical contractor clearance territory we're discussing. Brooks ended the call with growing concern about the situation developing under his command. As he prepared to leave his office, Williams appeared at his door with urgent expression. Sir, I need to report escalating harassment targeting Captain Chun. Multiple personnel have witnessed increasingly aggressive behavior from the SEAL team. Brooks gestured her inside, closing the door behind her. Give me specifics, Williams. What exactly are you observing? They're deliberately blocking her movement, making loud comments about disability and military fitness, and coordinating their actions to maximize her discomfort. Master Chief Peterson dismissed my initial report as boys blowing off steam. Brooks felt his jaw tighten as he processed the information. How many incidents have you documented? At least 6 separate occasions today, sir. The behavior is becoming more brazen as they realize there are no immediate consequences. Meanwhile, Chen had reached the conference room to find the 3 SEALs engaged in what appeared to be strategic positioning. They had arranged themselves to control the primary sight lines and traffic flow, ensuring their presence would dominate any presentation she attempted. Rodriguez looked up as she entered, his expression shifting to one of mock concern. Captain Chun, you look tired. Maybe you should consider finding a desk job somewhere safer. All this walking around military facilities seems to be wearing you down. Chun began setting up her presentation materials, her movements precise despite the obvious stress. Thank you for your concern, Petty Officer Rodriguez. I'm quite capable of managing my own physical requirements. Thompson leaned back in his chair, his tone carrying false sympathy. We're just looking out for you, Captain. Military environments can be challenging for people with your limitations. There's no shame in recognizing when something's beyond your capabilities. Martinez nodded sagely, as if offering profound wisdom. Exactly. Better to bow out gracefully than push yourself into situations where you might become a liability to others. Chen's hands stilled on her laptop keyboard, her professional mask showing the first signs of genuine anger. Gentlemen, your concern for my welfare is noted. However, your assessment of my capabilities appears to be based on incomplete information. Rodriguez sensed an opening and pressed forward. Incomplete how? We can see what we can see, Captain. Physical limitations are pretty obvious to people who depend on physical capability for survival. You see what you choose to see, Chen replied, her voice carrying an edge that hadn't been present in previous interactions. Your assumptions about my experience and qualifications say more about your prejudices than my abilities. Thompson stood and moved closer to Chen's position, his body language becoming increasingly confrontational. Prejudices? Captain, this isn't about prejudice. This is about practical reality. People who can't keep up shouldn't be advising people whose lives depend on keeping up. Brooks appeared in the doorway at that moment, his expression darkening as he observed the scene. The 3 SEALs were positioned around Chun in a formation that appeared deliberately intimidating, while her body language suggested someone under sustained pressure. Gentlemen, step back and take your seats, Brooks commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had reached the end of his patience. Rodriguez looked genuinely surprised by the sharp tone. Sir, we were just discussing operational requirements with Captain Chen. No problems here. The problem is your behavior, which multiple personnel have reported as harassment, Brooks replied firmly. This ends now, or you'll be explaining yourselves to higher authority. Martinez attempted to defuse the situation with a tone of injured innocence. Sir, we're just asking legitimate questions about qualifications. If someone's designing systems for combat use, shouldn't we understand their background? Your questions stopped being legitimate when they became personal attacks on Captain Chen's disability, Brooks stated clearly. Any further incidents will result in formal disciplinary action. The 3 SEALs exchanged glances that suggested they viewed Brooks' intervention as temporary protection rather than permanent resolution. Thompson made one final comment as they prepared to leave. Sir, With respect, protecting people from legitimate questions about their qualifications doesn't make those questions go away. It just delays the answers. As they filed out, Rodriguez paused at the door. Captain Chun, we're not trying to be unreasonable. We just believe that people giving life-or-death advice should have life-or-death experience. When you're ready to prove that experience exists, we'll be ready to listen. Chun remained motionless at the front of the room until their footsteps faded, then slowly sank into the nearest chair. Brooks observed her careful composure finally beginning to crack under the sustained pressure of their coordinated campaign. Brooks arrived at Admiral Richardson's outer office 30 minutes before his scheduled appointment, hoping to gain additional insight into Chen's background before the harassment situation spiraled completely out of control. The Admiral's aide, Commander Walsh, greeted him with professional courtesy tinged with curiosity. Lieutenant Commander Brooks, the Admiral will see you shortly. He mentioned you have questions about personnel records. Brooks nodded, choosing his words carefully. I need guidance regarding Captain Sarah Chen's service history. There are questions about her operational background that standard channels can't address. Walsh's expression shifted subtly, suggesting recognition of the name. Captain Chen's record contains elements that require special handling. Her name appears in several classified after-action reports that remain restricted at the highest levels. Before Brooks could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent text from Williams. Situation escalating. Need immediate intervention. Meanwhile, Chen had entered the main corridor, carrying her presentation materials when Rodriguez deliberately stepped into her path, his movement timed to coincide with her forward stride. The collision sent her stumbling sideways, her crutch clattering against the wall as she fought to maintain balance. Oops, Rodriguez said with theatrical concern, making no effort to help as Chun struggled to regain her footing. Sorry, Captain. Didn't realize you needed that much space to maneuver. Martinez observed the incident from his position near the bulletin board, his voice carrying clearly across the corridor. Maybe we should paint yellow safety lines on the floor. Like they do in hospitals for people who need extra assistance getting around. Thompson emerged from the adjacent office, apparently drawn by the commotion. Or maybe just post signs warning that the corridor is shared space. Some people might not realize they need to watch out for moving obstacles. Chun retrieved her crutch with deliberate precision, her professional composure now showing visible strain. Several other personnel had witnessed the incident, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to openly disapproving. Petty Officer Williams approached from the administrative area, her face flushed with anger. That was completely inappropriate behavior. I'm reporting this incident immediately. Rodriguez turned toward Williams with an expression of injured innocence. Williams, accidents happen. Captain Chen knows we didn't mean anything by it. Right, Captain? Chen looked directly at Rodriguez, her voice steady despite the obvious stress. Accidents require absence of intent, Petty Officer. Your behavior demonstrates clear intentionality. Martinez stepped closer, his tone shifting to something more aggressive. Captain, maybe the real problem is that you're trying to function in an environment that's not designed for your limitations. Some places just aren't accessible for everyone. The only limitation I'm encountering is the unprofessional behavior of personnel who should know better, Chen replied, her composure hanging by increasingly thin threads. Thompson joined a circle that was forming around Chen's position. Unprofessional? We're just pointing out practical realities. Military facilities are designed for military personnel who meet military standards. Brooks' phone continued buzzing with updates from Williams as he waited for Admiral Richardson. Walsh noticed his distraction and leaned forward with lowered voice. Lieutenant Commander, I can tell you that Captain Chen's medical records reference combat-related injuries sustained during special operations. The circumstances surrounding those injuries remain classified, but they involved extraordinary heroism. Brooks felt his stomach tighten as he realized the magnitude of the situation developing under his command. What kind of special operations are we discussing? The kind that don't officially exist, Walsh replied carefully. Her name appears in connection with operations that saved American lives under extremely hostile conditions. Back in the corridor, the confrontation had attracted additional personnel, creating an audience that the three SEALs seemed to view as validation rather than scrutiny. Rodriguez had positioned himself directly in front of Chun, his body language becoming increasingly confrontational. "Captain, let's be honest about what's happening here. You're trying to advise operators about situations you've never faced. That's not just inappropriate. It's potentially dangerous to people whose lives matter." Chen's grip on her crutch tightened, her knuckles whitening with the effort of maintaining control. "Your assessment of my experience is based on ignorance and prejudice, nothing more." Martinez laughed harshly, his voice rising to ensure maximum audience exposure. "Ignorance? We can see exactly what we're dealing with. Someone who can't handle basic mobility, trying to advise people whose lives depend on advanced mobility." Thompson moved closer, his tone becoming more aggressive. "Maybe you should stick to consulting for desk jobs where your limitations won't get real soldiers killed." Petty Officer Williams had heard enough. She stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had reached her breaking point. "That's enough. This behavior is disgraceful and violates every standard of professional conduct." Rodriguez turned toward Williams with mock surprise. "Williams, we're having a professional discussion about operational qualifications. Nobody's being unreasonable here." "Professional discussion?" Williams replied incredulously. "You deliberately caused her to stumble, made jokes about painting safety lines, and suggested she doesn't belong in military facilities. That's harassment, not discussion." Martinez shrugged dismissively. "We're just stating obvious facts about physical requirements. If Captain Chun can't handle honest feedback about her limitations, maybe she should reconsider her career choices." Commander Jackson appeared at the end of the corridor, drawn by the raised voices and gathering crowd. His expression darkened as he observed the scene, noting how the three SEALs had positioned themselves around Chun in what appeared to be a deliberately intimidating formation. "What's going on here?" Jackson demanded, his voice cutting through the multiple conversations. Rodriguez attempted to maintain his innocent expression. "Sir, we were just discussing operational requirements with Captain Chun. She seems to think her limitations shouldn't affect her ability to advise combat personnel." Jackson's gaze moved between Chen's obviously stressed demeanor and the satisfied expressions of the three SEALs. "Petty officers, return to your assigned duties immediately. This conversation is over." Thompson made one final comment as they prepared to disperse. "Sir, the conversation might be over, but the fundamental questions about qualifications remain. Those don't go away just because someone doesn't want to answer them." As the three SEALs departed, Jackson approached Chun, his expression concerned. "Captain, are you all right? What exactly happened here?" Chun straightened her shoulders, attempting to restore her professional demeanor despite the obvious toll the confrontation had taken. "Commander Jackson, I appreciate your intervention. The situation was becoming increasingly difficult to manage professionally." Jackson nodded grimly, recognizing that he had witnessed the culmination of a pattern rather than an isolated incident. The harassment had clearly escalated beyond the point where it could be dismissed as routine military skepticism. Rodriguez cornered Chun near the administrative offices, his patience with subtlety apparently exhausted. Thompson and Martinez flanked his position, creating a barrier that forced Chun to halt her forward progress toward the exit. "Captain Chun, we've been dancing around this issue all week," Rodriguez began, his voice carrying the tone of someone delivering an ultimatum. "It's time for straight answers. You don't belong in military spaces, and everyone here knows it." Thompson nodded emphatically, his expression showing none of the false politeness that had characterized earlier interactions. "Exactly. Real warriors don't need walking aids to get around. Real warriors don't hide behind classified excuses when asked about their experience." Chun shifted her weight, adjusting her grip on her crutch as she faced the three men blocking her path. "Gentlemen, your definition of real warriors appears to be rather limited. Perhaps you should consider expanding your perspective." Martinez stepped closer, his voice dropping to a more menacing tone. Our perspective is based on actual experience in actual combat situations. What's yours based on? Reports you've read? Stories you've heard? Theory you learned in some classroom? My perspective is based on information I cannot share with personnel who lack appropriate clearances, Chen replied, her professional composure showing signs of serious strain. Rodriguez laughed harshly, the sound echoing off the corridor walls. There it is again. The magic classified excuse. Every time someone calls you out, you hide behind security protocols that nobody can verify. Thompson moved to Chen's left side, completing an informal circle around her position. You know what I think, Captain? I think you've never seen combat in your life. I think you're a desk jockey with a fake military background trying to play soldier. Chen's jaw tightened visibly, her control beginning to fracture under the sustained assault. Your thoughts on my background are based on ignorance and prejudice, nothing more. Martinez seized on her emotional response immediately. Prove us wrong, then. Give us one specific example of combat experience that doesn't involve your convenient classifications. Just one real moment when you faced enemy fire. I cannot provide operational details that compromise ongoing security protocols, Chen repeated, her voice beginning to show the strain of maintaining professional standards under extreme pressure. Rodriguez stepped directly in front of her, his body language becoming openly confrontational. Cannot or will not. Because from where we're standing, it looks like you're hiding behind regulations to cover up the fact that you've never been in a real fight in your life. Thompson added his voice to the chorus, his tone carrying increasing aggression. It's actually insulting when you think about it. Someone with no combat experience trying to advise people who've bled for their country. Someone who can't even walk straight, trying to tell operators how to move under fire. Chen's composure finally cracked, her voice rising slightly as she responded. You have absolutely no idea what I've done or what I've sacrificed in service to this country. Your assumptions are as uninformed as they are offensive. Martinez pounced on her emotional display with obvious satisfaction. Then prove it. Stop hiding behind classifications and show us you've earned the right to be here. Give us something real instead of these vague references to operations that nobody can verify. The operations I've participated in remain classified at levels that require congressional notification, Chen stated, her professional mask slipping further with each exchange. Personnel involved in those missions maintain operational security that supersedes your personal curiosity. Rodriguez moved even closer, his voice dropping to a more personal attack. Congressional notification? Captain, you're really going all out with this fantasy. What's next? Are you going to tell us you were involved in taking out bin Laden? Thompson laughed appreciatively at Rodriguez's suggestion. Maybe she was the pilot who flew the mission. Oh wait, that would require someone who can actually handle physical demands under pressure. Chen looked between the three faces surrounding her, each displaying varying degrees of mockery and challenge. Her briefcase felt heavier in her grip, the weight of months of harassment finally overwhelming her carefully maintained professionalism. You want specifics? Chen asked, her voice carrying a dangerous edge that none of them had heard before. You want to know about real combat experience? Martinez leaned forward eagerly, sensing what he believed was imminent vindication. Absolutely. Give us something concrete instead of these vague classifications. Chen opened her mouth to respond, then stopped abruptly, her training overriding her emotional state. I cannot compromise operational security to satisfy your personal validation requirements. Rodriguez threw his hands up in theatrical frustration. And there it is. Every single time, the same excuse. Captain, at some point you have to admit that you're lying about your background. Thompson nodded agreement, his voice carrying finality. Face it, Captain. You're a contractor with a fake military history trying to impress people who've actually served. The disability is just convenient cover for your lack of real experience. Meanwhile, Brooks had finally gained access to Admiral Richardson's office, where his discovery was about to change everything. Richardson's aide had pulled Chen's service record, and what Brooks was seeing on the classified database made his blood run cold. Lieutenant Commander, Admiral Richardson said as he entered his office. "I understand you have questions about Captain Sarah Chun. Before we discuss her situation, you should know that her name appears in the Medal of Honor database." Brooks felt his stomach drop as the magnitude of the situation became clear. "Sir, my personnel are currently questioning her combat qualifications based on her disability." Richardson's expression shifted to something approaching anger. "Your personnel are questioning a decorated special operations pilot who flew extraction missions behind enemy lines. Captain Chen's injury occurred during an emergency landing while evacuating wounded SEALs." Back in the corridor, the confrontation had reached its peak. Rodriguez was demanding final proof of Chen's service when his phone buzzed with an urgent message from Brooks. "Cease all interaction with Captain Chen immediately. Proceed to conference room for emergency briefing." But Rodriguez was too focused on what he perceived as his moment of triumph to notice the message. He leaned forward, preparing to deliver what he intended as the final blow to Chen's credibility. "Captain, since you can't provide any proof of combat experience, I think it's time you admitted the truth about your fake military background." Chen stared at him with an expression that had shifted from professional frustration to something approaching pity. "Petty Officer Rodriguez, you have no idea what truth you're about to discover." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor with a distinctive cadence of senior military authority. Admiral Richardson's voice cut through the confrontation before his imposing figure rounded the corner, accompanied by Brooks and Commander Walsh. "Attention on deck." The three SEALs snapped to rigid attention, their aggressive postures transforming instantly into military bearing as they recognized the 3 gold stars adorning Richardson's collar. Chun straightened as well, though her relief was visible despite her attempt to maintain composure. Richardson's gaze swept across the scene, taking in the positioning of the 3 enlisted men around Chen's isolated figure. His expression darkened as he processed what he was observing. "Gentlemen, I need an explanation for what appears to be a coordinated confrontation with Captain Chun." Rodriguez, still maintaining his position of attention, attempted to frame the situation favorably. "Sir, we were discussing operational qualifications with the captain. We have concerns about personnel with limited physical capabilities advising combat operations." Richardson's eyes narrowed as he studied Rodriguez's face. "Limited physical capabilities? Petty Officer, do you know who you're addressing?" Martinez, emboldened by what he perceived as the Admiral's interest in their concerns, spoke up. "Sir, Captain Chun has been unable to provide any verification of actual combat experience. We believe personnel advising operators should have operational credibility." Richardson turned to face Martinez directly, his voice dropping to the measured tone senior officers used when they were controlling significant anger. "Operational credibility? You're questioning the operational credibility of Captain Sarah Chun." Thompson, apparently misreading the Admiral's tone as supportive, added his voice to the explanation. "Yes, sir. She claims classified experience, but won't provide specifics. We believe she's misrepresenting her background." Richardson looked at Brooks, who nodded grimly, confirming that these were indeed the personnel he had discussed. The Admiral's expression shifted to something approaching disbelief. "Gentlemen, Captain Chun is a former Special Operations Aviation Regiment pilot who flew classified missions behind enemy lines in both Afghanistan and Syria." The 3 SEALs' expressions began to change as the implications of Richardson's words penetrated their preconceptions. Rodriguez's confident posture started to waver slightly. "Sir, we had no information about Special Operations background," Rodriguez began, but Richardson cut him off with a raised hand. "Captain Chun flew extraction missions for SEAL teams, Rangers, and Delta Force operators during some of the most dangerous periods of both conflicts." Martinez's face had gone pale as he began to understand the magnitude of their mistake. "Sir, her service record showed contractor status." "We assumed." "You assumed," Richardson interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades of military authority. Captain Chin's contractor status is a cover assignment that allows her to continue contributing to special operations without compromising her medical retirement status. Thompson attempted to maintain some semblance of their original position. Sir, we were concerned about physical limitations affecting operational advice. Richardson's response came with surgical precision. Physical limitations? Captain Chin's injury occurred during an emergency landing while evacuating 12 wounded special operations personnel from a compromised landing zone in Syria. The corridor had grown completely silent except for Richardson's voice as he continued the revelation that was systematically destroying every assumption the three SEALs had made. She maintained aircraft control for 47 minutes after taking enemy fire that shattered her left leg and damaged critical flight systems. Rodriguez's military bearing remained intact, but his expression showed dawning horror as he realized what they had been mocking. Martinez stood frozen, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. The personnel she evacuated that day included 3 Navy SEALs from Team 6 who would have died without her intervention. Richardson paused, allowing the full impact of his words to settle before delivering the final blow to their assumptions. Captain Chin was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for extraordinary heroism under fire, and her name was submitted for consideration for the Medal of Honor. Thompson's legs appeared unsteady as the weight of their behavior crashed down on him. The jokes about mobility aids, the comments about real warriors, the accusations of fake military service, all of it now revealed as attacks on someone whose sacrifice far exceeded anything they had experienced. Brooks stepped forward, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Admiral, these personnel have been systematically harassing Captain Chin for the past week, including deliberate physical interference and public humiliation. Richardson's gaze moved between the 3 SEALs, each now standing rigidly at attention, but clearly struggling with the revelation of Chin's true background. Harassment. Richardson repeated slowly, as if testing the word. You've been harassing a decorated combat veteran who risked her life to save your brothers in arms. Rodriguez found his voice, though it came out strained and barely audible. Sir, we had no knowledge of Captain Chin's service record. If we had known. Richardson's interruption was swift and merciless. If you had known, you would have treated her with the respect she earned, the respect that every service member deserves regardless of their physical condition. Martinez attempted to speak, but found no words adequate to address the situation they had created. The magnitude of their misjudgment was becoming impossible to process. Chin had remained silent throughout Richardson's revelation, watching the 3 men who had tormented her for days come to terms with the reality of her service. Her expression showed no satisfaction, only the weary resignation of someone who had endured unnecessary suffering. Richardson turned to address Chin directly, his tone shifting to one of profound respect. Captain, I owe you an apology on behalf of this command. The treatment you've received is inexcusable and reflects a failure of leadership at multiple levels. Chin nodded slightly, her professionalism intact despite everything she had endured. Admiral, I appreciate your support. The mission requirements remain more important than personal considerations. Richardson's expression hardened as he turned back to the 3 SEALs. Gentlemen, you will report to my office at 0800 tomorrow morning to explain how Navy personnel came to harass a decorated hero. Dismissed. As the 3 men departed, their earlier swagger replaced by the unsteady gait of people whose world had just been completely overturned, Richardson addressed Chin once more. Captain, your technical modifications have already saved lives in current operations. The personnel you've been trying to help owe you more than they'll ever know. Richardson gestured toward the nearby conference room, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to delivering information that changed perspectives permanently. Gentlemen, before you're dismissed, you need to understand the full scope of what Captain Chin accomplished during her service. The 3 SEALs followed numbly, their earlier confidence replaced by the hollow expression of people confronting the magnitude of their misjudgment. Chin accompanied the group, though Richardson's respectful gesture indicating she should enter first stood in stark contrast to the treatment she had received from the enlisted personnel. Captain Chen's distinguished Flying Cross citation reads as follows. Richardson began, retrieving a document from his aide's folder. For extraordinary heroism while participating in aerial flight during combat operations against an armed enemy in the Syrian Arab Republic. Rodriguez stared at the table, unable to meet Chen's gaze as Richardson continued reading the official recognition of heroism they had been mocking for days. Captain Chen's aircraft came under intense enemy fire while conducting a medical evacuation of wounded Special Operations personnel from a compromised landing zone. Despite suffering severe personal injury and critical aircraft damage, she maintained control of the aircraft and successfully evacuated 12 critically wounded personnel. Martinez's hands trembled slightly as he processed the contrast between their assumptions and the reality being revealed. The jokes about mobility aids and physical limitations now appeared monstrous in the context of Richardson's official recitation. The emergency landing Captain Chen executed under enemy fire is considered one of the most difficult aviation saves in Special Operations history. Richardson continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. 3 independent after-action reviews concluded that any other pilot would have been killed in the same situation. Thompson finally found his voice, though it came out strained and barely recognizable. Sir, we had no idea. The service record available to us showed contractor status only. Richardson's expression showed no sympathy for their ignorance. Her contractor status is deliberately obscured to protect ongoing operations. Captain Chun continues to serve despite medical retirement because her expertise saves lives. Chun spoke for the first time since entering the room, her voice calm despite everything she had endured. Admiral, the technical modifications we've been discussing implement lessons learned from actual combat situations. The systems work because they address real operational challenges. Richardson nodded respectfully before continuing his devastating revelation. The 12 personnel Captain Chun evacuated that day included casualties from 3 different special operations units. Among them were Petty Officer Harrison and Petty Officer Kumar from SEAL Team 6. Rodriguez looked up sharply, recognition flashing across his features. Harrison and Kumar were legendary figures within the SEAL community, heroes whose sacrifice have been documented in multiple official histories. Harrison died from his wounds 40 minutes after evacuation. Kumar survived because Captain Chen's emergency medical training kept him alive during the flight to the field hospital. The room fell silent as the implications settled. Chen had not only risked her own life, but had actually saved one of their community's most respected operators through direct medical intervention under combat conditions. Richardson reached into his jacket and withdrew a simple mobility aid similar to Chen's, setting it quietly on the conference table. The 3 SEALs stared at the device with dawning comprehension. My own injury occurred during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Richardson explained matter-of-factly. Roadside bomb took out our convoy vehicle. I've used assistance for mobility for 15 years. Martinez looked physically ill as he realized they had been mocking not only Chun, but, by extension, a 3-star admiral who had earned his rank while managing similar physical challenges. The difference between Captain Chun and myself, Richardson continued, is that her injury occurred while actively saving lives under fire. Mine occurred while I was a passenger in a vehicle that hit an IED. Thompson attempted to speak, but found himself unable to form words adequate to address the situation. The systematic harassment they had conducted now appeared not just unprofessional, but morally reprehensible. Captain Chen's current assignment involves developing systems that protect special operations personnel, Richardson explained. Her technical modifications have been implemented across multiple commands and have already prevented an estimated 43 casualties. Chen remained silent, watching the 3 men process the reality that their harassment had targeted someone whose ongoing work was actively protecting their brothers in arms. Richardson's tone shifted to something more personal as he addressed the leadership failure the situation represented. What disturbs me most about this situation is not just the harassment itself, but what it reveals about our failure to educate personnel about the diversity of military service and sacrifice. Rodriguez finally managed to speak, his voice barely audible. "Sir, if we had known about Captain Chen's background, this never would have happened." Richardson's response was swift and unforgiving. "If you had treated her with the basic respect every service member deserves, her background would have been irrelevant. The problem isn't what you didn't know. The problem is how you chose to behave based on assumptions." Martinez nodded miserably. His earlier swagger completely evaporated. "Sir, we thought she was just another contractor trying to tell operators how to do their jobs." "She is a contractor," Richardson replied pointedly. "A contractor whose special operations experience exceeds that of most personnel in this facility. Your assumptions about contractors, like your assumptions about disability, reveal prejudices that have no place in professional military service." Chen spoke again, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned the right to be heard. "Gentlemen, the systems I've developed will protect personnel like yourselves in future operations. That mission remains more important than personal grievances." Thompson looked directly at Chun for the first time since Richardson's revelation began, his expression showing the beginning of comprehension about the magnitude of grace she was extending despite their treatment. "Captain Chun has requested to continue her current assignment despite the harassment she's endured," Richardson announced. "She believes the technical improvements are too important to delay for personal considerations." The three SEALs sat in stunned silence, processing the reality that the person they had been tormenting was not only a decorated hero, but was continuing to work on their behalf despite their abuse. Richardson stood, his final words carrying the weight of absolute judgment. Captain Chen's service record includes 47 combat missions, 3 Valor Awards, and the personal thanks of 2 sitting presidents. The question you need to answer is what your service record will say about how you treated her. Richardson's voice carried the finality of institutional judgment as he addressed the 3 SEALs who remained seated at the conference table. "Effective immediately, I'm ordering a formal investigation into the systematic harassment Captain Chun has endured at this facility." Brooks stepped forward with a thick folder containing Williams' documented reports and witness statements. "Sir, we have multiple incidents recorded by base personnel, including deliberate physical interference and coordinated verbal harassment." Rodriguez attempted to maintain some semblance of dignity despite the crushing weight of their exposed behavior. "Sir, we accept responsibility for our actions. We were wrong about Captain Chen's background and qualifications." Richardson's expression showed no softening at the admission. "Your responsibility extends beyond being wrong about her background. You systematically harassed a service member based on disability status, violating both military regulations and basic human decency." Master Chief Peterson appeared at the conference room door, summoned by Richardson's aide. His confident demeanor wavered immediately as he observed the Admiral's expression and the subdued posture of his subordinates. "Master Chief Peterson," Richardson began without preamble, "explain to me how multiple reports of harassment were dismissed as boys blowing off steam, while a decorated combat veteran was being systematically abused under your supervision." Peterson's face flushed as he realized the magnitude of his leadership failure. "Sir, I was not aware of the scope of the incidents or Captain Chen's service background. I made an error in judgment regarding the seriousness of the situation." "Your error in judgment resulted in continued harassment of a Medal of Honor nominee," Richardson replied with surgical precision. "Your removal from supervisory responsibilities is effective immediately pending the completion of this investigation." Thompson found his voice, though it came out strained and barely recognizable. "Sir, Master Chief Peterson couldn't have known about Captain Chen's classified background. The fault lies with our behavior, not his supervision." Richardson turned his attention to Thompson with a look of someone who had spent decades dealing with attempts to deflect responsibility. "His fault lies in dismissing legitimate harassment reports without investigation." Classification levels don't excuse ignoring professional conduct standards. Williams entered the room carrying additional documentation, her expression showing the satisfaction of someone whose reports were finally receiving appropriate attention. Richardson acknowledged her presence with a respectful nod. Petty Officer Williams, your persistence in reporting these incidents despite resistance from your chain of command deserves formal recognition. You'll be receiving a commendation for upholding military standards under difficult circumstances. Martinez looked at Williams with something approaching shame, realizing that her attempts to protect Chun had been dismissed while their harassment had been enabled by command indifference. The three of you will undergo formal counseling sessions with the base chaplain and equal opportunity advisor, Richardson announced, his tone leaving no room for discussion. Additionally, you'll participate in mandatory disability awareness training designed for military personnel. Brooks added his voice to the institutional response. Sir, I recommend implementing base-wide training on disability inclusion and veteran services. This incident suggests broader educational gaps regarding diverse forms of military service. Richardson nodded approvingly at Brooks' suggestion. Excellent recommendation. We'll establish mandatory annual training for all personnel on recognizing and respecting the diverse ways military members serve and sacrifice. Chun spoke for the first time since the formal proceedings began, her voice carrying the authority of someone whose recommendations carried significant weight. Admiral, I suggest the training includes specific modules on assumptions about contractor personnel and the reality that many contractors are veterans continuing their service in different capacities. Outstanding point, Captain Chun. The training will address both disability awareness and contractor relations, Richardson agreed, making notes on his tablet. Rodriguez mustered the courage to address Chun directly, his voice carrying genuine remorse. Captain Chun, I know apologies are inadequate for what we've done, but I need you to know that we're horrified by our behavior now that we understand who you are and what you've accomplished. Chun studied his face carefully before responding, her professional composure intact despite the emotional weight of the moment. Petty Officer Rodriguez, the problem isn't that you didn't know who I am. The problem is how you treated someone you thought had no power to respond. Martinez nodded miserably at her observation, recognizing the deeper truth about their behavior. You're right, Captain. We targeted you because we thought you couldn't fight back. That makes our actions even worse. Richardson seized on Chen's insight to drive home a larger lesson. That observation captures exactly why this incident represents a systemic failure rather than individual misconduct. Professional military behavior doesn't depend on knowing someone's service record. Thompson attempted to find words adequate to express his understanding of their failure. Captain Chun, we've learned that our assumptions about disability in military service were completely wrong. We're committed to doing better. Chen's response carried both grace and steel. Commitment to doing better requires understanding that every person deserves respect regardless of their physical condition or background. That shouldn't require special training to understand. Brooks interjected with practical considerations for moving forward. Captain Chun, given everything that's happened, would you prefer reassignment to a different facility? We can arrange transfer within 48 hours. Chen's answer surprised everyone in the room with its immediate certainty. Lieutenant Commander Brooks, the technical modifications I'm developing are too important to delay for personal considerations. I'll be completing this assignment as planned. Richardson's expression showed both respect and concern for her decision. Captain, you've endured significant harassment here. You shouldn't feel obligated to continue working in an environment where you've been mistreated. Admiral, the systems I'm implementing will protect special operations personnel in future missions, Chun replied with quiet conviction. Those protections matter more than the temporary discomfort of working with people who need education about diversity and respect. The three SEALs exchanged glances that revealed their growing comprehension of the extraordinary character they had been attacking. Chen's commitment to protecting them despite their abuse demonstrated a level of professional dedication they were struggling to process. Richardson stood, his final administrative actions carrying the weight of institutional change. This incident will result in policy modifications regarding harassment reporting, disability accommodation, and contractor relations. Captain Chin's experience here will prevent similar situations at other facilities. Peterson prepared to leave. His career effectively ended by his failure to address the harassment reports. Williams remained to coordinate the formal investigation that would document every aspect of the systematic abuse Chun had endured. As the meeting concluded, Richardson addressed Chun with the respect her service had earned. "Captain, your grace under pressure and commitment to mission completion exemplify the highest traditions of military service. This command is honored by your presence." 6 months after the incident that had shaken Naval Special Warfare Command to its foundation, Captain Sarah Chin stood before a gathering of senior military officials at the Pentagon, presenting the final implementation report for her technical modifications. The systems she had developed despite systematic harassment were now deployed across 17 different special operations units. The enhanced surveillance protocols have reduced operator exposure time by an average of 41%, Chin reported to the assembled leadership. This translates to measurable improvements in mission success rates and casualty prevention. Admiral Richardson, now serving as Deputy Commander of Special Operations Command, nodded with satisfaction as he reviewed the operational data. Chin's persistence in completing her work despite the harassment had resulted in innovations that were already saving lives in current operations. Rodriguez appeared at the entrance to the Pentagon briefing room, his dress uniform displaying the ribbons he had earned during subsequent deployments. The mandatory counseling and disability awareness training had fundamentally changed his perspective on military service and sacrifice. His presence at Chin's presentation was voluntary, representing his commitment to understanding the broader impact of her work. As Chin concluded her presentation, Rodriguez approached with the measured respect of someone who had learned difficult lessons about assumptions and prejudice. "Captain Chun, I wanted you to know that the modifications you developed were implemented on our last deployment. They performed exactly as you predicted." Chin turned to face him, noting the genuine transformation in his demeanor and attitude. "I'm glad to hear the systems are protecting personnel effectively, Petty Officer Rodriguez. That was always the primary objective." Rodriguez nodded, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had confronted his own failures. "Captain, I also wanted to report that Martinez and I have been working with the Base Equal Opportunity Office to develop harassment prevention protocols. We're trying to ensure what happened to you never happens again." The commitment in his voice reflected the comprehensive changes that had rippled through the command structure following the investigation. Thompson had transferred to a training facility where he was helping implement disability awareness programs, while Martinez had become an advocate for inclusive policies within special operations communities. Chin's influence extended far beyond the technical modifications she had developed. The incident had catalyzed institutional changes that were transforming military culture across multiple commands. Richardson had used her experience as a case study in leadership training programs, demonstrating how unconscious bias could undermine unit effectiveness and morale. The military has formally adopted the accessibility standards Captain Chun recommended, Admiral Stevens announced during his address to the assembled leadership. These standards ensure that all facilities can accommodate the diverse ways military members serve, regardless of physical condition. Williams, now promoted to Petty Officer First Class, had been assigned to oversee implementation of the new harassment reporting protocols. Her persistence in documenting Chin's abuse had resulted in systemic changes that protected vulnerable personnel throughout the military hierarchy. Chin received notification of her promotion to lieutenant colonel during a quiet ceremony attended by the personnel who had supported her through the harassment ordeal. Richardson personally pinned the new rank insignia on her uniform, acknowledging both her technical contributions and her extraordinary grace under pressure. "Your work has saved more lives than most combat operations," Richardson observed during the promotion ceremony. "The systems you developed will protect special operations personnel for decades to come." Brooks, now Commander Brooks, following his own promotion, had established the Sarah Chun Award for Technical Innovation in Special Operations. The annual recognition honored military personnel and contractors who developed systems that enhanced operational effectiveness while improving personnel safety. The first recipient of the award was Chun herself, though she insisted the recognition be shared with the teams who had implemented her modifications under combat conditions. Her humility in accepting praise contrasted sharply with the accusations of ego and self-promotion that had characterized the initial harassment. Rodriguez encountered Chun at the award ceremony, their interaction observed by dozens of special operations personnel who had learned about the harassment incident through official training programs. His approach demonstrated the transformation that comprehensive education and genuine remorse could achieve. Captain Chun, I've been working with new contractor personnel to ensure they receive appropriate respect and support, Rodriguez reported. We're trying to create the environment you deserve from the beginning. Chin's response reflected the professional grace that had sustained her through months of systematic abuse. The important thing is that future personnel won't experience what I experienced. Creating positive change from negative experiences gives meaning to the suffering. Thompson appeared at Chin's office during her final week at the facility, carrying documentation related to the permanent policy changes her case had generated. His transformation from antagonist to advocate demonstrated the potential for genuine growth when confronted with the consequences of prejudiced behavior. The new contractor orientation includes modules on recognizing veteran status and understanding diverse service backgrounds, Thompson explained. Personnel learned that many contractors are continuing their military service in different capacities. Chun reviewed the materials with satisfaction, noting how her experience had been transformed into educational content that would prevent similar harassment. The systematic abuse she had endured was now protecting others from experiencing the same treatment. 2 years after the incident, Chun received an invitation to address the graduating class at the Naval War College. Her speech focused on the importance of recognizing that military service takes many forms, and that physical limitations often reflect extraordinary sacrifice rather than personal weakness. The question isn't whether someone fits your preconceptions about military service, Chun told the assembled future leaders. The question is whether you have the wisdom to recognize the diverse ways people contribute to mission success. Rodriguez, now a chief petty officer, sat in the audience with his wife and children. The harassment incident had become a defining moment in his military career, not because of the negative behavior it revealed, but because of the positive changes it had motivated. His children would grow up understanding that strength comes in many forms, and that heroism often looks different than popular imagination suggests. Martinez had established a mentorship program pairing experienced operators with disabled veterans entering contractor positions. The program ensured that Chin's experience of isolation and harassment was replaced with support and integration for future personnel facing similar challenges. Chin's technical modifications continued evolving, with new versions implementing lessons learned from ongoing operations. Her work had become institutionalized within Special Operations doctrine, ensuring that her contributions would protect personnel long after her retirement. As she prepared for her next assignment, developing aviation safety systems for medical evacuation units, Chun reflected on the transformation her harassment experience had generated. The systematic abuse that had threatened to end her career had instead catalyzed changes that would protect countless military personnel for generations to come. The 3 SEALs who had once mocked her mobility aid now understood that her crutch represented not limitation, but the physical evidence of extraordinary heroism under fire. Their education had become part of a larger cultural shift, recognizing that military service encompasses many forms of sacrifice, all deserving of respect and recognition.